I was sitting at the Lenovo campus out there in Morrisville, the Lenovo Executive Center, which is where the Carolina Hurricanes had their draft this weekend. And I was sitting there on Friday, and I was thinking about how Eric Tulsky was moving down in the draft, and then even on Saturday, seeing him moving down in the draft, about how they started the day on Friday with a first-round pick, a third-round pick, a fourth-round pick, and then a couple sixth and a seventh. So half of their picks going into the draft were 6th and 7th round picks. They only came in with 6 picks. But they walked out with 7 picks, 2 of them coming in the 3rd round, 3 of them in the 2nd round, and then a couple, like another 6th and a 7th round pick. So they ended up getting 5 picks in rounds 2 and 3. So again, finding value, finding market inefficiencies. And I think this is where general managers, even though the sports are different, can still learn from one another. I think this is where we saw the Charlotte Hornets, for example, make 4 picks on the NBA draft just the other day, or middle of last week. They made 4 picks total. They traded Mark Williams and got a late first-round pick to get a Liam McNeely and draft him 29, getting Con Knipple at 4, getting a guy like Sion James, then getting Ryan Kalkbrenner as well in the 2nd round as well. Guys that can help fill roles and raise the floor of your team moving forward as that franchise is still trying to find its way. But I was thinking about this for Football 4 for the Carolina Panthers and what Dan Morgan has been doing with the team in terms of finding value for players in different ways, like finding in the margins, where can we get a little bit better? Finding, again, like the Carolina Hurricanes do with drafting Russian players because it's a market inefficiency. Hey, we're going to get a player that has first-round talent that teams are afraid to touch because of whatever reason. Like, again, it's hard and difficult getting Russian players to come over to play in North America. It's not an easy thing to do. Not all players, even if they are drafted, are willing to actually come over here as they get older. Carolina isn't afraid to go after those guys. That's why they have an Alexander Nikishin on their team coming in. They're not afraid to go after those guys. And I think this is where Dan Morgan can learn and find some different things about players that they draft or find undrafted players where they can really find that value. I think of, for example, Jalen Coker going into his 2nd year with the Carolina Panthers this year. Probably going to be their 4th wide receiver, but after this upcoming year can grow into being a number 3 wide receiver for the team. He was an undrafted free agent last year out of Holy Cross. Again, undrafted free agent. Now, the 2024 draft class, Graham, if you remember correctly, was deep at wide receiver. Xavier Legette was a first-round pick at pick number 32. He was the 7th wide receiver taking in that first draft, in that first round. The 7th.
I want to say quarterbacks too, right? Well, I mean, quarterbacks always kind of pretty.
I mean, yeah, there were
heavy.
6 quarterbacks that were drafted in the first round of 2024 as well. So Carolina was able to recognize something in Jalen Coker about, okay, well, he doesn't quite have the foot speed. He ran like a 4.56 or 4.57 40-yard dash. But we know that his route running is great, and he has great hands, and he can still, even though he doesn't have elite speed, can still get separation from players. That's a player that we can target, and they definitely targeted as an undrafted free agent. I actually did talk to a couple people that they felt that if the wide receiver class in 2024 wasn't so deep, that he probably would have been a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick. Like he would have been a late day 3 pick. But because that there's so much depth that he fell into the category of the undrafted, and sure enough, Carolina was able to swoop in. And at times last year, Graham, when Adam Thielen was banged up, Xavier Legette was struggling, was also dealing through some injuries himself, there were some stretches where it felt like Jalen Coker was like the number 1 guy. So you found value. Yeah, you know what? This guy might lack one thing, but he has all these other qualities that we really do like. Other teams might be afraid because he lacks the quote-unquote speed, but we like his size, we like his hands, and his ability to still separate on intermediate routes. That's a player that we can find value in. Like the Carolina Hurricanes, how many times have we seen guys get drafted? Hey, that's a great elite skater, highly skilled, might be a little bit undersized. Or first-round talent has like one of the defensemen they drafted from Russia. 6'3", 190 pounds, 18-year-old that can still grow. First-round talent, but because he's stuck there in Russia, teams are afraid to draft him. So this is where I feel like Dan Morgan, at least over the last couple of years, especially when we saw it on the Panthers blueprint that came out last month or so, about a month or so ago. Panthers blueprint is a video series that the Carolina Panthers themselves put out on like YouTube and social media. It's basically their behind the scenes. Now it's like, state-run media, but it's their behind the scenes look at the NFL draft and free agency and those kinds of things, training camp. So it's like their own controlled stuff, but we saw how they used analytics in different ways in order to determine what they were doing in the draft. Like they literally had sitting right behind Dan Morgan over his left shoulder was like an analytics guy who was going over all these different scenarios of, hey, if we stick at this pick, the way the draft has been going, knowing the tendencies and needs of all these other teams that are drafting ahead of us, what's the percentage likelihood that one of these two players is going to be there? And the guy was like, 44%. Okay, 44%, that's not a high enough odds for us. Let's make a move up. And then finding value in moving up in the draft in terms of not overpaying for that pick. Or vice versa. Hey, if we stay here at this pick, what are the odds that one of these two guys are going to be there? Just over 50%. Okay, if it's 50-50, we'll stay here. Let's keep track of these odds and all that stuff. Finding market value. Or getting a team to overpay. We even saw it was the LA Rams, Graham. We're looking to move up from pick 26 to pick 8 in the draft. My guess is they're going to look to take a quarterback. Generally, you don't move from 26 to 8 unless you're going to go take a QB.
Yep.
My guess. My guess is probably going to be Jackson Dart. Either way. They showed how Carolina was like, we're willing to move if you give us X amount. We're not going to settle for anything less than what we're asking for because we feel like this is too valuable. Because there's also the value of, hey, you know what? We're picking 8. Let's just take a guy that we feel could be a dude.
And it felt like the Chargers were kind of taken back by that because they
the Rams
up,
were, yeah.
The Rams, excuse me.
Yeah.
The Rams were taken back by that because they hung up the phone, and then it came down like to the very last, I think with a minute left on the board.
Yeah, a minute or two left.
Or two left before they finally called back, and we're like, we're not doing that. And then Carolina just pulled the trigger.
Yeah, Carolina's like, okay, fine. You're not willing to pay our price? Cool. And then literally just see Dan Morgan go, oh, they're out? Okay, cool. T-Mac.
Yep.
Literally says it, and everyone's like, all right, we got the guy. But that's where Carolina, I feel like, is trying to continue to find value. Because remember, going into the 2024 draft, Carolina didn't have a first-round pick. And they only, I think, had 6 picks going in because they got a second-round pick for the part of the Brian Burns trade. They had 2 seconds and all that. Well, they walked away with 7 picks, 1 in each round. They maneuvered and manipulated up and down the draft to try and figure out what they wanted. And I think that's where Dan Morgan, I think, is really growing as a general manager. And we've seen that. And we've seen that with the Carolina Hurricanes over the last several years about how well they've built their roster. Like, let's call it what it is. The Carolina Hurricanes have built a tremendous roster. And one of the things that Carolina Panthers are doing with their free agent signings is, hey, we're not necessarily going out and getting the biggest name, but we're going to find guys that fit our system that still have growth potential. Like a lot of the free agents that they signed this offseason were guys that were 25, 26 years old, have played 4 years in the NFL, still have growth potential because they're still entering their prime years, and guys that actually fit the system that they want to do, especially on the defensive front. That's what they did this offseason. And it's like, oh, you know what? Someone might not pay as much as us or might not see the value that we see in this player. Let's go get that player that's still ascending that can grow with us in our system and flourish in our system. I think that's what Dan Morgan is really starting to do, and I think that's why you're starting to see a lot of the national pundits, Graham, are like, hey, sleeper team, Carolina Panthers. Say sleeper team, Panthers. Hey, who could sneak into the playoffs as a 7 seed? Hey, why not Carolina? All those different kinds of things. Finding the value that others may not see or taking advantage of market inefficiencies. That's where Carolina can do. The Panthers can do that. We've seen the Carolina Hurricanes do that, which we're going to discuss, obviously, a little bit more of hockey coming up because there's a lot going on in the NHL world.